morning already here. Thank you for coming, and I'm happy to start with our panel, which would be about disinformation. And the issue or the question today would be, when should we respond to piece of disinformation, and when should we just ignore it in order not to draw more attention to it? And we have three panelists here. Unfortunately, we don't have the Lithuanian because he had to stay in Lithuania, but we'll try to cover this part as well somehow, or maybe just say something that isn't quite true, but we'll try. We have a problem with the microphone. Yeah.
Yeah. No, okay. I just wanted to say that I think it's great because now we as Latvian and Estonian, we can finally speak freely about what we think about Lithuanians. It's great. They're not here. They can't say anything back.
True. So maybe we'll spread some disinformation ourselves, but that's not the point of this panel. The point of this panel is to discuss it on a more moral level. And okay, this is Elīna Lange from NATO Strategic Center for Excellence for yes, exactly. Now it's early in the morning for me too. But Elīna is from Latvia, clearly. Burley, who's an expert from outside Baltic sphere of influence, and who'll have a higher level of discussion here. And then we have Juurvee, who's from Tallinn, from ICDS, International Center for Defense Studies. And maybe first of all, yeah, good morning. Okay, and maybe we'll just, each one of you gets to introduce themselves in order not to, put words to anybody's mouth. So Elīna, you started already. You're the emotional southerner here, so.
Yeah, that's right. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here back in Estonia. I think my second favorite country after Latvia. So indeed, I work for NATO Strategic Communication Center of Excellence. I'm also really pleased to see that the NATO battle group is guarding us. Thank you, guys. I feel very safe. So the center that I work for, we have, I think by now we have one such center in almost every NATO nation. You have your cyber center in Estonia. I'm sure you all know about it. So it's not part of NATO command structure, but it has NATO's accreditation. So it's an international organization founded by nations. In our case, we have all three Baltic countries, not only present in the center, but actually at the leadership of the center. So from Estonia, we have our deputy director. So basically, if anything goes wrong with the projects that we do, it's his fault. And my portfolio is largely related to looking at Russian and Chinese information influence in the Nordic-Baltic region. So our countries and the Scandinavians and Iceland and Finland. And also I have expertise in Georgia's information environment, and I also run a project on strategic communications terminology, which is a kind of philosophical exercise where we discuss actually what do words like disinformation actually mean. So yes, so that's shortly about me. Thank you.
How did you end up being an expert on disinformation and strategic communication? How did you encounter that subject?
Actually, that's related to my studies. I graduated my master's from communication science, so it kind of started there. And then, yes, when Latvia was setting up the center, they asked me to come back from Georgia, where I was at the moment, and help to set it up. And then strategic communications actually was a very new term at that time. Nobody really knew what it is, even at NATO, even though we had a policy on it, but nobody really knew what to do with this thing, this new animal. And we all gradually just learned. I think we are all still learning what strategic communications actually means and where disinformation has its little box in this big endeavor. Yeah.
Ross has actually founded his own center and he's now the executive director of it. So Ross, tell a bit about yourself. How did you make this issue your bread and butter?
Good morning, everybody. I overindulged in some karaoke last night, so my voice is slightly croaky, so apologies for that. And it turns out I thought it was Estonian karaoke, but I've been told it's Finnish karaoke. So again, disinformation in action. So my background, I actually was a civil servant in the UK government, doing all kinds of fairly standard foreign policy stuff like Iran and non-proliferation and Middle East peace process. And then in 2017, Salisbury happened. And from not knowing anything about disinformation and hybrid warfare and information operations, suddenly I was immersed in this strange new world, this new form of warfare. And it's a little bit like that scene in The Matrix where Lawrence Fishburne gives Neo the red pill or the blue pill. And I was I went down the rabbit hole and found myself in this wonderful, strange world of disinformation where everything is real, but yet nothing is real. Everything is fake. Truth is lies, and there's no such thing as objective truth, which is slightly confusing and can be mind-bending at times. But I felt so passionate about it, and I recognized that, like so many others on this panel included, that it is the greatest national security challenge of our time. And it's the greatest challenge we face as a society as well. So I decided to set up a non-profit called Centre for Information Resilience. And we basically do three things. We counter and research disinformation. We use open source to expose human rights abuses, which are often linked to disinformation, especially in Ukraine. We also work in Myanmar and Afghanistan as well. And then the third thing we do is we counter online harms targeting women and minorities, because often people who are working in the field of national security and disinformation journalism are targeted by gendered and sexist disinformation. So we're trying to help out on that front.
Okay, and now we have also Ivo. How did you enter the business of tackling disinformation? And how big part of your work is that topic?
Yeah, I'm afraid that your question makes me feel very old because I tackled the problem already around the turn of the century or turn of the millennium when I was still studying history at the University of Tartu. And of course it was easy to notice some deviations in historiography which nowadays we would call just faking or faking history. But at that time it was a little bit new thing still. When it became bread and butter for me, it was in 2008, summer of 2008, when I was seconded to the government office. So Estonia was to some extent still a little bit in shock of what happened in April 2007. And it was interesting time to go there because it was just prior to the Russia's aggression against Georgia. And yeah, this was the time when Estonia made its first steps while building the Stratcom, and I had the pleasure to witness these steps. And afterwards, I have been, it's not so, how to say, huge part of my work anymore, but I've been involved as a think tanker, as a teacher, and to some extent also as a contractor solving some practical issues. And now I'm head of the Security and Resilience Program at the International Center for Defense and Security. So we all together, we have three programs. One is foreign relations, the other is defense, and third one is security and resilience, which basically has to deal with all the things that are connected with security, but are not directly defense or directly foreign relations. So of course, among many issues, everything connected to information warfare falls in this domain as well. And at the same time also I'm a part-time researcher at the Estonian Military Academy with main focus on information warfare issues.
So you're a historian, so could you say that, and you have been dealing with this subject for 2 decades now, could you say that we have certain waves of either disinformation or the topic of disinformation becoming fashionable? You mentioned you already started with that subject at the turn of the century. There was 2008, there was also 2014. Now it's the new wave of the Ukrainian war. Could you say that there are waves of this?
Well, definitely. If you would ask that what has changed, then it would be probably a very long lecture. But if we look at our central adversary, which is Russia, then definitely there have been different waves. I guess where we can make some distinction is prior to 2004, when Estonia and also other Baltic states became NATO and EU full members. And then next watershed would be something around 2014. Not only what happened in Ukraine, but more importantly, the NATO battle groups in the Baltic states that were found at that time, and which became somehow well, the targets of Russian attacks. And of course now, since February, we are in quite new reality once again, because for the first time many Russian media outlets are banned in this country.
Could we say that the eastern neighbor has developed its weapons in that sense? Can we also say that, well, there was first generation, second generation, like we say with fighter planes, that they haven't been successful with developing the fourth generation, fortunately, unlike the allies in the US. But could we say also with the information warfare or weapons, so-called?
Of course, they have developed a lot, but on the other hand, many things are effective when they are used for the first time. And well, for example, what we saw in the United States during the 2016 presidential elections campaign. So, but many things you can do only once. If you try exactly the same methodology for the second time, then you can't have the same efficiency.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think definitely they are being creative continuously, and although television, I think, remains the main source of propaganda and disinformation, but for example, now that it's blocked in our countries, we do see much more activity on channels that were not used that actively before, such as Telegram, for example. And also, they have been using TikTok quite actively. So these are other platforms that they were not using before. And TikTok, for example, came into play way before we actually blocked the television channels here. So they are all the time thinking of creative ways how to reach the audiences. But I would say that television, nevertheless, is the main source. And if you ask me, have they evolved? I would say big time.
Could you give some examples?
No, just if you just watch some of these discussion shows by Solovyov, for example, I think
they are banned, right?
Currently, yes. So, well, you can do with a VPN, and then, by the way, there still remain Facebook accounts. Interestingly enough, and I'm not reporting them, I have to admit, because I don't have a VPN at home, so I need my sources where to watch Solovyov. I really miss him, to be honest. So I don't report these Facebook accounts because they post these videos occasionally, and I can at least watch them there. No, I think they have evolved big time also in their rhetoric, because if before it was, particularly against our countries, if it was, let's say, aggressive and talking down to us, and of course also spreading lies, then now I think we are just somewhere in the cosmos already. It's beyond any kind of healthy imagination, the things that are being said or what we are being threatened with. So it's a new level, I would say.
Anything else apart from the tactical nuclear attack? You said the cosmos, the things that they say, outrageous. Yes.
I think this nuclear destruction is probably the most outrageous thing, because what surprises me is just the way how they normalize it to their own audiences, basically saying that, well, it's an inevitable thing that is going to happen, and actually it's absolutely fine, and we should be kind of glad and happy about it. Well,
we meaning, everybody.
We meaning, yeah, local Russian audience. I just find it fascinating, but it also shows you how much this has progressed domestically. Yeah, that they feel that it's okay to say such things. Imagine if something like that was said on Estonian TV. You would have
nuclear weapons, of course.
Yeah, well, but
it would be. Although as a journalist, I've encountered once an email by a reader that the best thing Estonia could do now to defend itself would be acquiring a nuclear weapon. So it kind of gets to people's heads. Yeah, Ross.
So just talking about those clips, I think we're not giving them quite enough credit. Because do you remember Donald Trump, right, talking about 2016? What he was so good at was dominating the news cycle, and they're exactly the same. So they're smart enough to know that if they talk about bombastic stuff and nuking different countries, that will be clipped up and be posted and retweeted and put on various channels and rile us all up and sort of stoke that sense of Russophobia and sort of saying, oh, aren't Russia awful? Look at what they're saying, and creating this echo chamber and creating this division. That's exactly what they want. They want those clips to go viral.
You mentioned that the beginning for you was Salisbury attack. What kind of things you could notice at that time, in addition to the actual chemical attack on soil of UK? What kind of information attacks were accompanying it?
So it was one of the first times that basically the UK government changed tactics when it came to countering disinformation. So previously what had happened was the UK government and others and US government would try and debunk every single disinformation narrative that would come out. So around Salisbury, there was all of this, the stuff around it was actually a MI5 inside job and all of this kind of stuff. And for the first time, instead of debunking each individual narrative, what we decided to do was a little bit of pre-bunking and sort of say, this is what we expect Russia is going to say, and they said it. And then at the same time, nothing if not predictable. And at the same time, rather than replicating each individual narrative, you just basically sort of take it as a whole and try and debunk the disinformation as a whole rather than each individual thing. And it did work.
Which actually brings us to our main question. When should you start actively debunking something, and when should you just hope that it will pass and you shouldn't magnify it with your own debunking? That, okay, there was this infamous story or this kind of hearsay or something you found from Facebook. Where would you draw the line? When should you react? When should you just sit it out?
You go.
I guess that there is not one single rule that you probably should make a little SWOT analysis in every time. First of all, trying to figure out that who is the target audience and what is the intended outcome on the target audience, and from then on, that is it dangerous or not, and probably that's what you have to do every single time. I guess that for Estonia, probably the most let's say dangerous case, or which might be, or hopefully someday will be in some textbooks, is from the beginning of September 2008, when there was news all over the Russian media that the Estonian Soviet Socialist Republic has been re-established in a farm in northeastern Estonia, and the Estonian media picked it up and reported it as a fact. Which it was not just some guys in Leningrad Oblast were having vodka and making some pictures with the flag of Estonian Soviet Socialist Republic, and which were disseminated. And this is definitely something that you have to debunk, because it wasn't a very ordinary time. It was less than 1 month after Russian aggression against Georgia, and everybody was nervous, because when there is any military action on the Russian borders, then the question that if Estonia will be next is going to be asked by international media, or if it's not going to be asked by international media, then at least many people ask it in their souls. And yeah, but otherwise, I guess it's you have to take every case. You have to take it case by case. There is no very simple rule.
the audience. Who is the typical audience? Because I think also in Estonia's case, in Latvia's case as well, there are at least two distinct groups, Estonian speakers and Russian speakers. Maybe the Finns at the Helsinki bar are a different thing. But who, and also, but it would be also interesting to ask with UK's case that whom are they targeting actually?
Well, it depends on the disinformation, but I mean, in political communications, right, there's this rule when you do media training, if you're, sat down with the president of Estonia and you've got a big interview coming up and you say, whatever you do, don't repeat something bad. So if someone says, is it true that you were really drunk last night in a karaoke bar? I shouldn't say, no, I wasn't drunk in a karaoke bar, because A, that can get clipped up and get spread on social media, and B, you're just reinforcing to the audience the bit of disinformation that you're trying to debunk. So this, I think, a couple of years ago, pre-Salisbury and around that sort of time, there was a big movement in the disinformation space around debunking. It was like, we have to train armies. You had here in the Baltics, Lithuanian elves and the kind of elves networks who would quickly get on social media and jump on something and try and debunk it as quickly as possible. But that doesn't always work. Things move incredibly quickly. And so I think what we found in Ukraine, for example, what the UK government has done very effectively, and the US government, was this idea of pre-bunking, was declassifying intelligence, working with media organizations and academics and sort of saying, this is what's going to happen, this is the reasons why we think it's going to happen, and then you report that. And all of a sudden, the narratives that Russia were trying to deploy around NATO aggression, NATO expansion, they're less effective because the audience already know what's coming.
Including the war in Ukraine.
Including the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm just going to add that I think Estonia is a good example in the sense that population-wise, you are a small country, so you have limited human resources and you have to use them wisely. And I think this is what you learned already in 2007, that there is no point in running after each Russian message, each Russian narrative, and trying to contradict it and debunk it and explain it. So your strategy was, well, the important thing is that our allies and our Western friends know what's happening and what and why we are doing. And just, letting the Russian media boil in their own sauce and just working with your partners to get the support that you need. And I think that's one point, and the other one is that this is coming back to where does disinformation sit in this whole strategic communications business. Research shows that people who are satisfied with their life and with what we would call government services in a very broad understanding of this term, meaning that, they are relatively well off, things run smoothly in their country, they can get their health care, etc., etc. The propaganda and disinformation doesn't really work on them. And we have specific data about Latvia, where we see that people who consume Russian television, well, consumed in the past, Russian television, they were not actually affected by this propaganda and disinformation if they were happy with their life. And this is what we have to think about, that Russia always tries to push this main story about our countries really is this destruction and suppression narrative that we are failed states, right? We can't do anything right. We're not really truly independent, blah, blah, blah. We know all these stories, right? And the thing is that if any normal Estonian wakes up in the morning and sees that everything is great, right, then this just doesn't work. So this is about strategic communications of your country, because it's mostly about the deeds, what you actually do and provide for your citizens, rather than what you say. Because we know politicians can say a lot of nice things, but if they don't happen in reality, we have a problem, right? And then these Russian narratives and disinformation start to work. So,
Eva, I'm rephrasing my previous question. How well do we know what's going on in our Russian-speaking information sphere? Because we have, I think, quite two quite distinct communities, Estonian speakers and Russian speakers, and sometimes I think those worlds can be quite apart from each other.
Well, it's a good question. It depends on how do you define we. I hope that the state authorities who are responsible for understanding it, what's going on there, I hope that they do. Well, yeah, maybe I will a little bit take the ball where Elīna left it, that it's definitely true about that satisfaction. But unfortunately, the number of people who are satisfied or happy, it might decrease as well when they see, I don't know, rising energy prices and COVID, for example, which also spread a lot of discontent in the society, although it had nothing to do directly with Russia or Estonian government and so on. And although we have banned the Russian TV channels, then in Northeast they are easily accessible even from the air. I just visited Northeast several weeks ago, and if you look at the TV antennas on the roofs, then they all are turned in
towards Solovjov.
Yes, that's the way it is. And of course you can see plenty of the satellite dishes as well. So they are not really in our information environment, and which is, of course, I don't know, it's a danger, but the problem that it happens just next to the border.
Was it actually efficient banning those Russian channels? Because, okay, Elīna says that she doesn't have VPN, so she doesn't watch Solovjov as often as she would, but those people who were used to, maybe not Mr. Solovjov, but maybe some game show on Russian channel, or just wanted to get the, well, they had some habits of watching TV. Now they have brought a satellite dish and everything is going on the way it was before. Or do you think, how efficient do you think it was?
I'm afraid it's too early to say. As we know from the Cold War, when Soviet Union tried to ban or distract the Western radio stations that were broadcasting to Estonia and also Finnish TV, then it wasn't very efficient. But speaking about Narva, then those dishes and antennas were mostly there already before the ban, so we don't know how much it has influenced. We probably know that ETV Plus, the Russian language channel of Estonian public broadcasting, has gained some new audience after the ban. So this is definitely something that is desirable, but we will see how it works in the future and if it is sustainable, this and how large this success is going to be.
What about Latvia? Latvia has tried banning those channels temporarily also before.
Yeah, we have, and so has also Lithuania. But the situation, as you mentioned, is different in Lithuania because they just don't have this large Russian-speaking part of the population. Actually, we don't have data, so we can't actually say what kind of impact has it had. But I think the main problem here is, again, coming back to strategic communications, there was a window of opportunity. I think it's closing if it hasn't closed already. And the thing is, if you take something away, you have to put something there instead. And we haven't done that, have we? I mean, you had your ETV Plus. Of course, we can discuss how successful is this project, and you know, I believe that the hope was that the audiences would kind of naturally migrate towards this channel, which part of them have, but probably not as many as you expected. And then, you know, okay, we have crises such as COVID, or we ban the channels, and then they migrate again partially to the channel. So, but the reality is also that we will never be able to compete with that level of entertainment shows, and that is the main reason why they are watching this television, and then they get this political programming on top of that, right? I don't think that many people actually go to these Russian sources, television sources, specifically for political programming and news. It's mostly for entertainment, right? So the question is, what do we put in place? And we haven't really put anything in place, I would say. Well, nothing significant, at least. And that is a problem. So I don't know. We can speculate what is going to happen. but yeah, it's up in the air at the moment.
I don't find the idea of banning TV stations or trying to go down that route is going to be massively successful. I mean, across Western Europe, they've banned RT, Sputnik, various different Russian state-linked outfits. The Russian disinformation, you go to where the audience is. So if you know where people are going on YouTube, then you figure out, okay, what are younger people going to be watching? They're probably going to be watching like Minecraft videos, right? It sounds very innocuous and innocent. What you can do is you can go into the comments. You can start embedding messages, political messages. This is what they did in some campaigns in Zambia and Zimbabwe, for example. They would go to where those audiences were, and we were trying to get a particular candidate elected or support a particular candidate, and they would put comments pretending to be other accounts in those videos. So this idea that you could ban a TV station and therefore kind of get round Russian disinformation is, I don't think it's massively going to work.
I would also think that in the UK, those people who were actually watching RT or Sputnik would have really peculiar taste. That those channels weren't popular before either.
No, about 20,000 people watched RT. But think about it like, this is going to sound a bit weird, but like a disinformation octopus. So you've got 8 tentacles. One tentacle is this kind of, media disinformation. It's one tentacle. If I want to disrupt or intervene in a state, then I have other tools that I can use, like influence operations. I can support political candidates. I can undermine social cohesion by supporting conspiracy theories. If you gave me a budget of 2 million quid, I mean, I could run riot in Estonia.
Okay.
Any takers?
I hope you would be choosing wisely whose money you accept, because that really sounded a bit suspicious. That as you were advertising your services.
So good. We're the good guys.
Okay. Eva had something to note. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's banned according to our penal code, and some people already are in jail, not because of espionage, but just making a deal with foreign services. So be cautious, although these £2 million might seem lucrative. Yeah, what I just wanted to have comment that maybe we shouldn't draw such line before entertainment and political programming, because if we look deeper into the Russian TV program, or well, I haven't much watched it after the February, but still there is no such distinction. Usually in the West, our media monitoring, it deals only with news, because it's the easiest thing to comprehend and it takes less time. But in the other hand, if you look at the movies they are watching, if you look at the TV shows and so on and so forth, then they all are quite full of political messages. Would it be from history, how KGB were cool guys, or I don't know, some children song contest where nice kids from Crimea, occupied Crimea, coming in, or so on, or and forth. It's usually it's possible to find. And I like that metaphor of octopus, and it's definitely true. And usually, well, it's sometimes said that if you cut one off of those, then there are going to grow 2 or more.
Dragon's head.
Okay, dragon's head, not
octopus is fairly
a little bit
octopus
different.
slowly dies, unfortunately.
Yeah, well. But we have the example of ISIS, actually, where it was also hugely problematic. And then in Twitter, when while one account was closed, then 5 new ones appeared, and it seemed to be endless fight. But in reality, it was possible to win it if it was taken seriously enough. And in that case, it was. I'm not so sure if we are there with Russia taking it so seriously at this point.
The ISIS example is really interesting one. So if you're talking about what people watch and entertainment, so one of the ways that NATO and the West did counter Daesh comms was you basically copied the content that was targeting the audience. So we knew in Syria and Iraq, for example, that people were consuming the Daesh content, which was really well put together and very, very effective. You would just copy it. And when it came to releasing that content onto channels, we basically figured out when those things were going to be released. We'd release ours at the same time, and it would just be as good a content, but with a positive message.
So you basically mentioned that you would have tridents, so with a positive message, when the Russia starts talking about tactical nuclear attack.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I'm afraid I'm a lot more pessimistic when it comes to this stuff. So, you were saying earlier on about the nature of if a society is functioning effectively, then disinformation is less effective, which I think is true, and especially in places like Estonia, where you've got a very high media literacy rate, very, very good education system. It is less effective. But if you look at the US has a pretty good education system. 46% of registered Republicans believe in QAnon, which is terrifying. I think the long-term ramifications of what happened on January 6th haven't caught up to us yet. And I think that what happened on January 6th should be an absolute wake-up call to the role of social media, the role of disinformation, the role of media literacy, and how we combat it as a Western society.
But if I may add, I think this social media thing is also very peculiar, because I think we also invest a lot of resources in monitoring social media, and there is this impression that, if something is brewing there, more and more people express certain views, etc., that it will have an effect in real life, that there will be a riot or demonstration or something. But actually, that is not always the case, because we always have to look at it in the context with the real life events and situation, and also resources. Because if something is going on in social media and it has no backing in the real life, so there is no real life network of people or money, or actually any significant trigger event, such as, Ivo was talking about these crisis situations that, as you said, in 2008, you had to look at that piece of disinformation in the context. You might have dismissed it in a different time, right? But at that point, it was crucial to actually debunk it. So I think we have to all the time keep in mind this real life context. And sometimes we, I think, spend too much resources and energy on something that goes on social media. Because although it can be some form of an indicator, a lot of this stuff, it does not actually materialize in real life. And I think this is what we are worried about the most, things like 6th of January. So we have to always find some kind of a balance and not assume that whatever goes on in social media, this is it, this is how people will act, because they often don't.
How would you understand whether it's just one crazy person saying something really outrageous, which can also cause a small storm in social media? Because if somebody says something really nuts, then people would start reacting, even if they are otherwise calm people, and they would understand in theory that this is a slightly disturbed person.
Well, tell you the truth, I think that what we have to realize is also that those who are vocal on social media publicly, it is this vocal minority. So these are usually people who have quite strong and marginal views. And there is always this silent majority, which just doesn't say anything. They don't comment or don't engage. And this is something that we often forget, and we get this impression that, oh my God, something is about to happen. When COVID started, when I was reading the commentary section in Facebook under, for example, our public broadcaster would put some news video or something, I was reading these comments, I thought, oh my God, I need to emigrate fast, because I live in a country of psychos. Everybody is mad. Just conspiracy theories, like the craziest stuff
There's
ever.
10 people who were commenting there.
Yeah, but it was Latvian people just commenting there. And I actually looked at their profiles, like genuine stuff, This was no Kremlin trolling or anything like that. But then I, said to myself, look, this is just a small number of people who obviously have no filters and no breaks, and they feel happy expressing these opinions there. And others, when they read, they also understand, well, what's the point in writing my kind of sensible opinion there, because you just get attacked and overridden, etc. So, you know, I also don't know how effective is this activity of the elves online. I think there is a point in doing that, but again, you have to understand, because some of these groups, you will never convince them. You know, there is this principle that there are certain audiences whom you just leave alone, you know, let them gradually get old and die, because you will never convince them, you'll never bring them on board.
Depends
they are
on
too
the
radical.
age, of course.
Yeah, but you know, but this is the case, and then you have to identify which are the groups with whom it's worth working, talking to, convincing, or engaging them.
When you look at who gets elected, then sometimes that this third person can get a huge followership. So when would you have to be alarmed?
But don't you think that because in Latvia, for example, yes, they get the followers and they get the votes, but it's not they are not in the top, you know, 2, 3, 4. It's like they get the votes. I mean, I'm talking about the really crazy ones, right?
Sometimes they can also be government parties.
Okay.
Yeah. No, but so yeah, you think you're optimistic in that sense that the craziest won't be running the country?
I think so, because even if you painted this bleak picture of the United States, but I think, I mean, things change with every election, right? People get fed up. There is a certain swing group that vote sometimes Republican, sometimes Democrat. There are the committed ones, which is the majority. But nevertheless, even their preferences of the candidate or type of candidate that they want for the next election, you know, it changes because, again, of the real life context.
So I'm really pessimistic on this front. I think it's true. Like social media obviously is a microcosm of society, and it's it doesn't represent everybody mainstream opinion, but there is a bleed across from the crazies into mainstream. I mean, a good example, right, is Brexit. 20 years ago, no one was realistically talking about leaving the European Union. It wasn't a thing, and yet Nigel Farage comes along, UKIP come along, and there's a bleed across in terms of narratives. It gains momentum, and suddenly the crazy person in the room, that crazy policy becomes mainstream. And all of a sudden, due to societal factors, political factors, but also incredibly effective social media campaign, it becomes a normalized, accepted policy and is enacted. And I think that's a good example. And I think, you know, COVID has taught us one thing, that there is real life consequences. People turning up to hospitals and riots, and there was examples of people coming in and destroying vaccine stockpiles and that sort of thing. Yeah, they are a minority, and yeah, they are the kind of minority crazies, but there is real world consequences, and it is, I feel, getting worse. When we all can't agree that there is such a thing as objective truth, I think we're in a bit of trouble.
One thing that was mentioned in the description of our panel, and we haven't talked much about it, is Ukraine. What kind of things have you noticed since February this year? What kind of things have been accompanying the military campaign? Elīna seems to be...
Yes, finally I have an example, because we were asked to prepare examples, and my daily job is not related to monitoring disinformation, and so my head is not full of excellent examples. But for this one, I'll tell you about an example which I found curious. So it was about Russian disinformation actors using TikTok, which was quite novel, I thought. And also, they were speaking in Russian, but talking about Latvian pensioners being attacked by Ukrainian refugees. And so it was not anymore this positioning of, you know, ethnic Latvians against ethnic Russians, you know, all these stories that we know. It was very interesting, I thought, that this story had changed, and they were actually trying to involve the Latvians, saying that, well, look, we are worried about these Latvian pensioners being sprayed with pepper spray and their money taken away
women and children.
by the Ukrainian, men, which apparently we have in huge quantities in Latvia. Well, we don't, of course, but I thought that was an interesting twist. And I think these days, it's kind of the story's focus is more on, well, we all are being now attacked, or we are worse off because of these Ukrainian refugees, all of us. So it's not just about Russians in Latvia or Russians in Estonia.
What do you think, how much energy our eastern neighbor has for other fronts in information space? They are clearly concentrating their effort on Ukraine at this moment, but what about countries like ours, or also in further west like UK? How big part of their effort goes to the Western audience now?
Well, it was, I guess, yesterday when two Izvestia journalists were taken down in Estonia because they were...
Not literally.
Well, taken, yeah, taken out from the train in Estonia by police. Because they had entered with tourist visas and actually were doing their propaganda work in Narva. So this is something that reminds me of my youth, or the good old 2000s, that at that time these things happened much more frequently, but there has been a pause for I don't know, for 5 or 6 years at least, and it's not at least so frequent as it used to be. So some of the resources can be dedicated to us as well, but I would be more worried about what is happening in not NATO or Western countries, but countries in Africa or South America, where the understanding of the things is very much different from the understanding of the state of affairs here, where usually or quite frequently the US is seen as some evil thing behind everything that is happening in the world, and where the Russian propaganda has much more fruitful ground. Which is definitely good thing that is happening since February, is that they are lying more than they used to. What they are saying, it's going further away from reality, and not only Solovyov and other journalists, but also the diplomats. So I assume that their MO, Minister of Foreign Affairs and also Mr. Lavrov, most of their credibility has eroded since late February. If they make some announcements, then they are not taken face value anymore and not taken so seriously as they would have been before. And this, of course, concerns the Baltic states as well. Should the peak of their information warfare turn to us at some point?
I get the impression that the first battles with Russia in Africa may have been taken by France in countries like Central Africa and Mali, because, well, Lavrov was traveling there, and the other foreign dignitaries from Foreign Ministry of Russia have been active there with Wagner Group and so on, and the US and the English-speaking world has only now started noticing Africa as the front, because the things that have been happening with African Union and Ukraine and grain from Ukraine and so on, it seems quite concerning.
And if I may add, it's not just about Russia, it's also about China, because if you look at Africa, then in some of the countries, almost all digital infrastructure is set up by China. So they can see and understand absolutely everything what people do with their mobile phones, on their laptops, etc. So all this data, all this digital communication is in a way potentially monitored or controlled by China. And this is something that we also forget, because this is also slowly creeping up, and we haven't seen any major disruption yet, but you know, who knows what's going to happen in the future. And I think this is one of our problems, that we focus our eye of Sauron, right? It kind of turns and like, ooh, this is where the problem is, but actually there's a lot of other things happening that we don't even talk about.
What about China in our countries? What have you noticed in Chinese? How noticeable are the disinformation campaigns or attempts to distort certain facts by China in countries like ours, or have they left the ground for Russia only?
Shall I start? Well, I don't like the word disinformation in that sense, because it hints that the facts have to be faked there, and there has to be some direct lie in the information that is spread, which is not usually the case for China. I guess that in some sense, well, one thing that is very different from Russia is the amount of resources that China possesses. Although we can say that Russia has a lot of money, then it's still quite few compared to China. And the other thing that Chinese seem to possess much more is time. They are not in the rush. They don't have to, I don't know, govern the world before Putin dies or whatever. So they don't have to act very hastily and without preparations. If we think about back to the 5G discussion here in Estonia, then well, it was quite a complex issue. As we saw, China was could procure some PR consultancy, and also some former politicians who were lobbying for their interests. So some of that influence we have already witnessed in Estonia as well.
Maybe we are too small fish. Just Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, it's not just for Chinese. In Chinese sense, where, I don't know.
If you declared what's going on to the Uyghurs as genocide, they'd quickly take notice. You know, you can poke them quite easily.
Or Tibet, if you
I think this is the thing, that they really become active, or in the past couple of years aggressive or threatening, only when it concerns damage to their very positive, benevolent kind of international image, because this is the most important thing to them. You would have thought that, you know, Russia was also concerned about its image, and actually I would say about 10 years ago, I think they were super concerned about maintaining this image of, oh, we are the peacekeepers, blah, 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 but now I think they already don't care. They are beyond that. So that is also a difference. And what is also, I think, the difference, that Chinese work behind the scenes. So yes, they invest in some media companies, they hire some PR consultancy, they, you know, interest some politicians through some procurements, but we don't really see that. And this is what is highly concerning, because with Russia, we know it's out there. You know, it's in our face every day, on social media, on television, on online portals. So we all the time understand that there is this threat and we are concerned. But as I said, what goes on with China, we don't really pay that much attention because it's not in your face.
True, it could be true, because in Estonia we've seen some former politicians becoming lobbyists for China, but I think becoming a lobbyist for Russia openly would be a bigger no-no. But yeah, Ross had a comment on that.
Well, just to say, I think in general, Chinese disinformation is a lot more pragmatic than Russian disinformation, which is a lot more kind of malign in nature and disruptive, and is the kind of sense that you throw everything at the wall with Russian disinformation and influence operations, and they kind of see what sticks. So about a year ago, the Center for Information Resilience, we found a Chinese influence operation online. So it was called Spamouflage Dragon, and it was basically about hundreds of YouTube accounts, Twitter accounts, often kind of zombie accounts. So you basically, through third parties, you buy bulk number of accounts from Bangladesh, from Turkey. So they're real people who basically built up an account and then you sell it. And all of these accounts were just stagnant. They were waiting to be used, but it will be used for the Chinese PR purposes. So, you know, isn't China great? And China's launched a new trade initiative, and oh, that's nice. Like, it's all quite fluffy. They get nasty with the Uyghur stuff. They get nasty with Taiwan, but it's kind of, I don't want to be patronizing here, and I'll probably get shot somewhere, but it's all kind of, oh, isn't that nice? Oh, you're angry. That's nice. And they have these wolf diplomats who kind of, you know, are very angry online and all that kind of stuff. It's very different to Russia, where it's, you know, it's a lot more malignant and a lot more disruptive.
Ivo.
Yeah, well, I guess most of the things already said that it's not always disinformation. It's they have large soft power capacity and they are using it. For example, some large celebration of Chinese New Year in Tallinn, which actually were pretty cool and are funded by Chinese
like dragon, right?
by Chinese embassy. And also, well, we have a quite large Chinese embassy. We also have the trade delegation. There are people working there, and why should we think that they are doing nothing? Of course they work. So there are bits and bytes we can see from here and there. There are already 2 people convicted in Estonia for espionage for the People's Liberation Army intelligence branch and so on. So yeah, if you look deeper, then you shouldn't say that there is nothing or that we can't notice anything in the public sphere. Although yeah, what is under the water or how large is the iceberg, I have no idea.
I hear that we have some questions in Slido, and then also we can take some from the audience, but first from Slido. Yeah. Okay, so what's the role of English language reporting in fighting disinformation? And is the current capability of the Baltic states for news in English sufficient? I think maybe that's the best for Ivo because he knows Estonia the best, and then you can maybe follow up with something. So, what's the role of English language reporting in fighting disinformation? And is the current capability of Baltic states for news in English sufficient?
Well, I'm not sure if we can say it's sufficient, but it's still much better than it used to be if you're interested in how it has evolved. And what's the importance? It is immense importance, I guess, because we have to make sure that our friends and allies would have a good picture of what's happening here, that they would draw their information from reliable sources, like, for example, Estonian public broadcasting. And so if there is going to be some kind of misinformation or disinformation from our neighbor, then it wouldn't be believed.
Ross.
So I think one of the changes we've seen in Ukraine has been this kind of growth of open source and the role that open source plays. So that's, you know, using geolocation and chronolocation to find out exactly when and where something happened, using satellite imagery. And I think the more the English language newsrooms, so New York Times, Financial Times, all of the kind of the big beasts have invested really, really heavily in open source units. The good thing about that is when it comes to combating disinformation, it's very hard to deny something that is objectively true from a satellite imagery. So you saw, for example, with Bucha as a good example, so that awful massacre that happened. Now, we had the satellite imagery, so we could see where the mass graves were being buried. And it also comes down to pre-bunking again. So we know what narratives the Russians are going to deploy. So they'll probably say, oh yeah, we don't deny something happened, but it was self-defense. These, you know, not civilians. Where we can use open source to prove that demonstrably that is not true.
I'm just going to add on this English language topic. I agree with Ivo. The situation in Latvia is much better than it used to be. And yeah, our public broadcaster is putting out a lot of kind of key information in English. But at the same time, 2 things. One, this information just sits there, and largely, well, actually, all of it is just in writing. So we don't have English language video content, and it just sits there. So if I really want to find it and read it, I can, but there is no targeted distribution to foreign audiences of this information, particularly on occasions such as, you know, banning the Russian language channels, which has been controversial before. I forgot what was the other clever thing I wanted to say. Oh, yes, I remember. So the other thing is about this vice versa. So one is about us communicating in English to the foreign audiences so that they understand what we are doing and why. But the other thing is about our own audiences knowing what's going on in the world. And sometimes when I open certain portals, I feel that I live in some kind of a remote village in the north of, I don't know, Iceland or somewhere, where I just read about fish and hockey and that's it. And there's a major crisis in the world and hardly anything is being reported. We have our own priorities, you know. A fox was spotted on this road near Riga. Oh my God, you know, and I have to actually waste my time searching these international portals, trying to read what BBC says, what CNN says. So I think it's also, you know, about how much our own journalists use the foreign media and foreign sources and translate and give this information back to our own people, because not everybody can read English, but a lot of people still can read Russian. Mm. And they want to know what's going on, so they Google it, and here we go. Plenty.
Certain portals.
Yes.
Although I wouldn't underestimate the value of cute animal stories. And we had a couple of years ago, we had a big story, which was also translated to English, with Russian bears, like the animals, who entered Estonia, Polja and Prosha. One of them went to Latvia and was probably hunted down by Latvians, and the other one was actually expatriated to Russia.
I have also a nice story for you. It's about these wild boars, the wild pigs. They come in autumn searching for food. They come into Riga and go to our Freedom Monument and snack at the flowers, and then they leave at night.
Who are worse, British bachelors being on the monument, or
I'm just trying to give you a clue that we can maybe talk about monuments. You know?
Am I on the right panel?
Monuments.
I take one more question from online, and then you can also mention the monuments. But before that, does cultural background affect responsiveness to disinformation? Who is more likely to believe fake news? Others. So are we getting racist?
I think we're totally safe here, because I think people in our countries are so individualistic and so suspicious we don't believe our own grandmother, right? But it's a problem in countries like Georgia, for example, where this cultural identity is much more collectivist, so people are much more closer to each other and interdependent, and the word of mouth plays a much more important role. And I've seen it by living there 4 years. People really believe it. If Ross were to tell me something, I wouldn't go and double check. I would just totally believe him, and I would pass it on to you. Because this collective trust level is much higher because of the networks being much tighter. Mm. And as I say, here I think people are much more critical just by nature.
Misanthropy.
Yeah, and also less social, you know, which is nice, so rumors don't spread that quickly.
It's a really good question, actually, because I think so some of the best examples of disinformation campaigns that I've seen really tap into that local context and religious context as well. So, for example, there was a great one in Zambia, which was a Russian disinformation campaign, where basically they set up Facebook pages for psalms, like religious, you know, the psalm, book of psalms, and so each day there would be a different psalm. There would be like a sunrise, a beautiful picture of something stirring and nationalistic in Zambia. They also love their animals as well there. Big safari place. And
that safari, I'm not sure if it's loving the animals.
No, oh yeah, good point. So they'd have a different one every day, and just as a way to draw in the audience. And then once you have the audience, then you can slightly shift the dial a little bit and start to add in political messages and start to add in, you know, messages around division. And again, there was another example from Africa was in the 2018 Kenyatta campaign in Kenya, where there was incredibly divisive disinformation around ethnic and religious lines that led to real-world events. So again, like that local context can be a really powerful weapon to create division.
Well, Elīna promised that we are going to speak about Lithuanians, so I will start.
Oh, yeah. You think Lithuanians are the ones who are just like crowd have a stronger crowd
Well,
psychology?
yeah, well, as it happens quite frequently, I guess it was intention here as well that in such kind of events or conferences, the people from three Baltic states, they end up in the same panels. And so several years ago, I was with one high-ranking PSYOPs officer from Lithuania who stated that, well, we Lithuanians, we are known to be Italians of the Baltic states. And I could add that, well, we Estonians, we are known to be Finns of the Baltic states. So
Who are the Latvians then? Latvians, just Latvians, the Balts of the Baltic states.
I don't know. The Latvian
We
representative
don't know
did
who
give
we are. We have identity crisis, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do believe, yes, that the cultural background different definitely has some impact. And yeah, but in general, people in the Baltic states, they seem to be quite, let's say, calm in all the countries.
So the monuments, Elīna, you want to jump in with this information, and since Latvia is removing, Estonia is removing Soviet monuments, and what have you noticed in relation to that campaign?
Yeah, I think what I have noticed is a major difference between what was happening in Tallinn in 2007 and what is now not happening in Riga. And it shows you that there is a certain effect of several things. One, that these propaganda and disinformation channels are actually cut off, because I believe that particularly on this monument issue at the moment, there is an effect that they can't just stir the emotions every day, 10 times a day, with this very kind of high-pitched rhetoric. So I think that's having an effect. Also, I think the work of our intelligence services and security services in Latvia and in Estonia, the fact that we have started to release our security service reports, annual reports, you know, with names, with pictures. Okay, some countries may say that this is not very nice practice, but I mean, it does have a certain effect. So people are kind of a bit more cautious maybe to jump into this kind of activities, right, as Nochnoi Dozor for, you know, the monument or whatever. And I think also this Ukraine war and the public demonstrations that we have had here in Latvia and in Estonia have showed that this kind of behavior is not going to be tolerated anymore, just by the society, let alone the law enforcement agencies. So I think it has changed the picture, and it's actually very interesting to see. We, of course, don't know what is going to happen when the monument actually starts to, you know, get removed. But at least for now, I would say that, yeah, the activity hasn't actually reached any significant level, which is interesting.
Ross, you're an outsider, so in your opinion, what do you think of us Estonians and Latvians removing the Soviet monuments now, and us having kept them for 30 years now, or 30 years, basically.
But they are not important monuments because animals don't visit them, as we discussed. They visit other monuments, so it's okay.
They like to pay tribute to Latvian War of Independence, for example. But what do you think of us doing it now as a campaign in reaction to the war in Ukraine, and not doing it beforehand, or maybe we should keep the monuments just the way they are, just as a reminder of our grim history?
Well, in the UK, we've had our own debates around monuments, obviously with the colonial past and the very controversial colonial past of you know, the British Empire, etc. Lots of people who are uncomfortable with some of the reminders of that past. It's an incredibly difficult issue, and you know, not being from here, I can only kind of relate it to, as I say, to the UK example. I mean, personally, I think it's good to contextualize those artifacts and those monuments. I don't think we should particularly get into a way of sort of what's the word? Iconoclasty.
Yeah,
Destroying sort of remnants of the past, I don't think is a long-term solution to resilient society. But properly contextualizing those artifacts and those monuments in the right way, I think, is appropriate. But then again, if they are causing tensions within communities and tensions that are resulting in violence, then I think it's probably pretty sensible to get rid of them.
Ivo, something?
Yeah, well, I guess it's, to speak about 30 or 31 years, it's a little bit populistic, because we all understand very well that in order to remove such monuments, there is a window of opportunity, and there has not been such window of opportunity before, and most probably this window of opportunity will close at some point rather sooner than later. Then secondly, on the context and conceptualizing, which is definitely true, but reconceptualize something is much easier to be said than done. For example, the Soviet tank, which symbolizes for the local people fight against fascism, and who wins against fascism.
The local people in Eastern Estonia.
Yeah, what they are learning from the information sphere where they are now, they are learning that such kind of fight against fascism is going on in Ukraine as well. So to say that there is nothing, no connections, I guess it's, I don't believe that anybody who says it could be very, very sincere. The other thing, what has been quite frequently pointed out, that, well, it's the memory of the fallen and it's sacred for the Russian people and so on, which makes me wonder, for example, that bronze soldier, prior to the corona crisis, approximately 30,000 people were going there on the 9th of May. And in 1990s, it was approximately 300 people who were going there. So the rise is 100 times. So I would have a question that if the memory of the fallen is so important, how come that they recalled it only after Putin and Russian TV told them about it? So yeah, it's a tricky topic. Definitely, but not only the Soviet monuments, but it's maybe not funny for foreigners, but even removal of that Jaak Juala statue from Viljandi, it became quite emotional, and I wouldn't have maybe noticed it, but I was in Viljandi just after it was installed there, and made a picture and then put it on my Facebook, and the debate there became really heated, although I had
just to explain, it was a remarkably ugly, kitschy.
I disagree. It was very nice monument.
And you like the sounds and the colorful lights there as well, right? It became as soon as it was let known that it will be removed soon, it became an object of I don't know, not admiration maybe, but some kind of curiosity.
Was that like an offense to Estonian aesthetic standards, or
it was? No. Something you should have seen.
I'll check out
You will
Ivo's
never see it,
Facebook.
unfortunately.
No,
Do you have it on your Facebook?
It was
I'll check
taken
it out.
to our national museum. Maybe they will display it eventually.
Yeah, but they said that they are not going to display it for several years before the emotions have gone down and so on.
People's eyes have to be recovered. So.
See, these are the kind of deep divisions in society that Russia will try and take advantage of.
No, I think the problem with these monuments is because you see, where this would be going with Ivo, right? He would be taking his children there, and generation after generation, they would be going to Viljandi to visit this monument. But this is the thing that we see, One thing is when this kind of distorted World War II history is being presented to you on TV, etc. And there's another thing when there is a real life object, place, monument, ritual, tradition. And what we do see on this 9th of May, it is indeed generations, children who are, I don't know, 4 years old, they are brought there and they hear the story, this distorted story. So in our case, this monument, if it continues to exist, it just continues to maintain this split division in our society and completely opposite understanding of our history. So, of course, I expect that there will be some kind of display of dissatisfaction and stir for some time, but in the long run, I think we will come out of it as a more united political nation.
I think it's a really good point, because this time last year, I think it was, Putin wrote, and apparently it was him who wrote this long, rambling 6,000-word essay trying to rewrite history around World War II and whose fault it was, and like trying to do these kind of strange ideas about a greater Russia and all of this kind of stuff. So this idea of rewriting history is very important to him personally and the kind of the people around him, and kind of the Malafiev and all of those guys. So in that sense, it is important to try and reclaim history and not let it be rewritten, and keep truth keep on going back to it, that objective truth about World War II and your past, keeping it close hold and protecting it.
Okay, we should take some questions from Slido, I think, also. Coming back to Ukraine, I think, has the response to disinformation changed since 24th of February? Should it have?
I think generally, I go back to this idea of how the West has responded to disinformation in Ukraine has been pretty successful. Like, I can't think of, apart from some of the Global South examples that you were mentioning earlier, I can't think of a single kind of, if you think back to February, right, Russia started out with specific narratives. So they started with, the Ukraine had been taken over by neo-fascists, neo-Nazis, and it's our responsibility to protect the ethnic Russians there and take out the government. That never took hold as a narrative. It just failed completely. And much of that was, A, because of the sophistication of the Ukrainian communications effort, which was pretty impressive, and also because Western countries, including the Baltic states and Estonia, were so successful in pre-bunking exactly those narratives. And so we've learnt a lot of the lessons from certainly 2014, where we were caught with our trousers down. That's a British expression. I think things have come full circle in that sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it is a success story, and this proactiveness that you mentioned, that this is something that we have never seen in history before, that so much and so exact intelligence information would be shared with so many. Basically, the public could have already several months prior to the war, almost in real time, the understanding how many Russian troops are where, watch the fresh satellite imagery and so on. So basically, what you said earlier, that what you are using to say, to try to predict what is Russia's next step, and then say that they are going to do it, it was done, but in much larger scale. And I hope that this is not going to be it's the first example in history, but I hope it's not the last one, that prior to the future wars, we will have again some intelligence shared with the wider public. But unfortunately, we can't be sure in that.
That's up to the intelligence services. But okay, I'll take the two questions we have left here, and then I hope we get to the audience as well. I'm sure, for two questions at least. You said that less satisfied people are more susceptible to disinformation. Should the West be aiming their messages to that part of the Russian population?
I think generally what we can and what we want to do, in what way we want to do this communication with audiences in other countries such as Russia, is very different to what Russia is doing to our countries. So that is the first difference. We will never go into Russia spreading lies, trying to stir things. So it would be just about, providing objective information, so to say, and potentially appealing to some emotions, but at least, we wouldn't be able and we wouldn't want to do something what in our country would be considered unacceptable or illegal. The other thing is that Russia for years has worked very hard to make sure that such information does not reach its audiences, because clearly it does understand that this is one of its biggest vulnerabilities, that people actually do live in poverty, there is huge corruption everywhere, little perspective for the future unless you are literally from one of the big cities and, middle or upper class. They do understand that it's a problem, so they've made sure that as little information as possible reaches these audiences that is not controlled by the government. And that is not just about Western stories, but it's also about voices from within Russia, right? They are now all declared foreign agents, and many of them, they've made sure that they can shut them up. So the general answer would be yes, but the realistic answer is, oh well.
I mean, how much is a F-35? What, about 130 million? Something like that? It's pretty chunky. I would love to put that money, just one, into independent media sector in Russia. Give 130 million pounds to Medusa or to the BBC World Service, the Russia service, and just see what happens. It would be fascinating.
But isn't the problem, Ross, that what I think in the context of this question, the audiences whom it would be maybe worth targeting, they don't go to Dozhd or Medusa or BBC Russia service. They just don't consume these sources.
That's true, but if you put 135 million on digital marketing and go to where the audiences are, then you'd reach those audiences. But no one is ever ambitious enough to do what the Russians have been doing to us for decades.
That actually explains also why the stealth Sukhois don't fly, because they have spent all the money on disinformation, so the fighters are not really...
Well, I mean, I think RAND a couple of years ago, the big research think tank, said that the Russians are spending $700 million on disinformation in Europe, which is a hefty amount of money. But as I say, just we spend a lot on defense procurement, and if anything, Ukraine has demonstrated how important it is to properly invest in your defense capability, but just be a little bit more ambitious and put some money into soft power and independent media and really invest and see what happens.
I just wanted to add one quick comment, because I think I always advocate that, before blaming Russia for everything, we have to look in our own backyard and kind of clean it up, right? That's the job number one. So we just had our mayor of Riga giving an interview in Russian language to Dozhd TV channel, TV Rain. And he did well. The interview was good, normal interview, valid questions that interested the Russian audience and gave him an excellent opportunity to actually convey our side of the story, why we are removing the monument, what's the context, all this, occupation narrative, blah, blah, blah. So, and then what happens? He gets trashed in Latvia by people from political end, even from media, like some journalists, etc. They just trash him. Ever since Dozhd has moved one of its operations to Latvia, they are constantly being attacked as, this Kremlin's agents of influence. We should expel them. Why are they here in the first place? So just, and this is one of the things, we've given them home, they can operate, they can give us opportunity to spread our own message to the Russian audiences, maybe not the right ones, but still some Russian audience. And at the same time, we, attack them, we trash them. If our politician goes to speak there, he's bad. So, what's going on? So which way do we want to go then?
Yeah, Ross made me really curious. I would also like to see the results. I assume that the first result would be that somebody becomes very rich, but definitely there would be some results in media sphere as well. But the original question was about messaging, and I don't think that we should, I don't know, think that Russian is like, I don't know, 5-year-old kid, or that we should have very different messaging for Russians. The overall message that their criminal leadership has started the war and is losing it, I guess it's fair enough. We shouldn't develop it, I don't know, in whatever direction that nothing is so clear and you should look at the both sides and blah blah blah. It's maybe not time and place.
One thing I really hated was when NATO started doing their campaigns for Russians, and they thought that they should do those cute stories about bakers on frigates and like the simplistic stories, while you had the Russian journalists at NATO headquarters and asking really wise questions about the INF Treaty. You could see that they were well informed, they had no illusions about their own government and so on. And you would try to sell them those baker stories. It's dumbing down. I was really irritated. But yeah, coming back to the questions from our audience, talking about China, Estonia dropped out of the 17+1 group and thinks about Taiwanese embassy. I'm not sure it's quite like that, but could this change China's interaction with Estonia? I think it's probably, Ivo, you must be the best expert on Estonia now.
Well, I guess that the results might be similar to what has happened to Lithuania, because, well, yeah.
Do you think Lithuania will keep up its position now on China and Taiwan, or will they actually quietly try to tone it down?
Well, I haven't looked so deep into the problem that I could have a comment on that, and it would also, I would have to have some expertise on Lithuania's internal policy that I don't have.
I'll just comment on behalf of Lithuania, because I'm partially entitled, right? You know, Lithuania never crumbles and never succumbs to, you know, China or anyone else. So I'm pretty certain they will hold this firm policy line. Also, I think the price that they pay, it's not that big, and it gives them a lot of other advantages, also politically and on the, yeah, I would say public relations front. So. Yeah, I'm pretty certain they will keep the line and be the front runners.
Okay, Johanna from the audience, I think, has asked us a question via Slido, because she sees it's probably hopeless to get something when you stand up and ask the question. So, you said that Russian propaganda is targeting younger people. What's the role of education in responding to disinformation? How to do media literacy successfully in schools? Do you have any good formula for that?
No, I think it's, look, obviously, for younger people, it's an entirely different information ecosystem that they're growing up in. I mean, I've got 2 daughters, and like the amount of time they spend on YouTube is terrifying. And just watching people play games, I've never got that. Why do you just watch videos of people playing games? Anyway, so we need to come up with a new vocabulary in terms of the way we teach younger people and tune into that, because I think one thing is, as I say, has become increasingly sophisticated, is both Russian and Chinese disinformation, is the way that they target younger people, often through visual content. So it's not like the old days where you kind of plant, a dodgy story in a newspaper somewhere. It's through memes, through GIFs, through often humorous content. And one thing, again, is going back to Ukraine, the Ukrainian strategic communications people have been incredibly good about producing their own content, which challenges that disinformation content in often very funny ways. So the incident that happened the other day with the bombing in the airbase in Crimea, they turned it into some very successful memes, which were kind of funny.
I would just add that I'm a bit fed up with this term media literacy. I think at the end of the day, because we talk about it as if it's kind of a special subject that should be taught at schools or something like this. And I think at the end of the day, it's just about teaching people how to think. That's all. How to critically think, be curious, look for information, compare sources, etc. This is just basic stuff that we should be learning from grade 1, at school. And it's not happening because although we heard very complimentary things about, the education systems in the Baltics, I think we are still largely in the 19th century or somewhere, I don't know. Because I have midlife crisis now, right? So I recently graduated from another university program, and I see that not that much has changed. I think that's a good
way of having midlife crisis.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have money for the car, for the red cabriolet, so I invested in education. But the thing is that we still have this principle where you go to university, you sit at the lecture. The lecturer just talks for 2 hours, you make notes, right? Then you go, if you are able to learn these notes by heart and then regenerate them at the exam, you're good, out you go. Okay, I'm exaggerating, of course, yeah, it's not that bad, but generally, I think we have to just, in the core principle, change how we just engage with children at schools. We have to teach them to think, to look for information, to compare information, to discuss information, not just sit there, listen, and then regenerate something.
Okay, now I promised 2 questions to the audience as well. I see 1 question. So unless the organizers drag us away, we can answer those. Yeah.
Hi, all of you. First of all, thank you for a nice conversation. And I'm Vitaly from German Embassy Italian, and my question is, to all of you, can people trust, especially younger generation, influencers, bloggers, and so to say independent journalists, not only from Russia, but in general? For example, if an independent journalist will go to Ukraine and make a reportage from there, how critical should we be to that? Thank you.
Okay, so who wants to take it? Independent journalist.
Yeah, the question was how quickly?
Should we trust?
Trust. Okay.
Yes.
So it's a good question because I think again one of the markers for this conflict has been the growth of so-called independent journalists. So people like Patrick Lancaster, Graham Phillips, who's unfortunately a Brit, who are basically useful idiots who go out to these places, often have been there for a number of years, and do independent reporting, which is not independent. The shame about that is that in previous conflicts there have been some absolutely brilliant journalists like Jessica Arrow, Simon Ostrovsky, who go to war zones and have done brilliant work reporting for credible outlets and raising awareness of what was happening. It was Simon actually in 2014 who proved was the first person to see the little green men in Crimea. So it was very, that kind of journalism is essential, but it's being undermined by the useful idiots. And I think the only way of stopping that happening is using legal means and enforcement means to do it. So I'm very pleased to see that Graham Phillips was sanctioned by the UK government, and I hope that he will be sanctioned by other European governments in response too.
To quote one Soviet movie, it was that we are living in very harsh times, so you can trust no one. I assume that it applies to all kinds of journalism, and if we think about that, how would you check the credibility of a source, then it's something like the historians and intelligence services do all the time. They have to look back at the history, what has been coming from the same source before. If it has been trustworthy and it fits into the overall context and largely truthful, then we may assume that the next reporting is the same way again. If it has been quite lunatic already before, then probably we shouldn't be very trustful.
And there is also this aspect of kind of social validation, so that when people start reporting, especially if it's on some very topical or controversial issues, then gradually you can see that they start being picked up by the mainstream media, who have established reputation and quality control and ethics and all that. So eventually you see that there is this gradual social validation happening, and then, you know, these journalists don't necessarily become mainstream per se, but you would definitely start seeing them being picked up by mainstream media as just a quote or, you know, comment or just their material being used, because they have the resources and they have to do the due diligence to check the source or material before they republish it further. But until that has happened, I would say, you know, again, just critical thinking, just compare, because as you rightly said, from Ukraine we have so much stuff coming out, you know, just people reporting, shooting videos, posting them. So, you know, you have to take all that with a pinch of salt and just compare and make your conclusion.
Just very quickly as well, on a practical note, I think there's a responsibility of the social media companies, YouTube especially, who continue to host people like Graham Phillips and Patrick Lancaster. Even I saw Russell Brand, who has a huge following on YouTube, was interviewing a journalist called Aaron Mate on his channel. Aaron Mate works for the Grey Zone. The Grey Zone is a Russian propaganda outfit. So it is incredibly irresponsible for YouTube and other social media companies to continue to host these people.
Okay, we have a second question from the audience.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is an excellent discussion. There's a lot of ordinary people that want to get involved in counter-propaganda as well. You've talked about the elves, there's NAFO as well now. I'm sure some of it maybe you see it as more of a hindrance than a help. What's your advice to ordinary people trying to get involved as well? You've talked about the effectiveness of pre-bunking. Obviously that's a lot more difficult if you don't have access to this kind of intelligence. So how can ordinary counter-propaganda activists be more helpful and less of a hindrance?
Okay, so how can normal people help?
I think normal people are never a hindrance to start with. I think what prevents people from engaging, particularly, like, because social media is really the place where you can, you know, get some leverage with what you do. Is what we discussed earlier about, you know, you writing your kind of sensible, critical opinion or sharing some trustworthy information, and you just get trashed, attacked, like called names, and eventually this happens to you once or twice and you give in. So I think one thing is to start with your closest ones. So basically not just going into random comment section under your public broadcaster's news post about COVID, you know, and try to counter all the conspiracies there, but basically try to keep an eye on people in your network of friends on Facebook or elsewhere. And if you see that they are kind of going down the wrong lane, just, you know, without publicly kind of exposing them and saying, oh, shame on you, but, you know, just writing a private message saying, hey, I saw what you posted. Well, have you also seen this? And like trying to at least work with those people who are in your circle. That already will be a big change. And also be super systematic about reporting. Okay, I made this joke earlier that I don't report the Facebook accounts who show all of your videos. Well, in fact, I do. And I think you have to be very systematic, because at the end of the day, yes, Facebook is bad at you know, checking all these reports and acting on them accordingly. But if you are very systematic and persistent and just keep doing it, eventually there is an effect, especially if you get other people involved. So that's why these organizations such as the Lithuanian Elves, etc., they are also in other countries. It works because it's a group of like-minded people, and they also inform each other. We've also had cases in Latvia where we have these disinformation pages, and I'm also part of one of these informal networks where we just get a ping saying, this page has appeared, it's spreading disinformation about vaccines or something like that. Let's report it to Facebook. And then for Facebook, it also makes a difference if, let's say, 20 people do it on the same day, or just one person on the same day, right? So I would say just like this, but yeah, never think that normal people are hindrance. But then what is normal?
Yeah, common people would probably be the better word.
Let's stay here till night, late night. Let's discuss what is normal.
I think somebody will take us away from the stage then. Okay.
It's a really good question. I think just on a practical note, so at the Centre for Information Resilience, we put out a call at the start of the conflict in Ukraine for volunteers to help us, because we have thousands and thousands of pieces of information that need to be verified before we have a map which basically the verified incident gets put on the map and then anyone can access it. So we had an amazing bunch of volunteers who have come on. We worked with about 150 volunteers. Some of those people have no experience of open source or the disinformation space in any sense. But what we do have is we have a load of YouTube videos which gives you the basics of like how to do chronolocation, geolocation. And there's a brilliant volunteer group as well called GeoConfirmed who we work with to help us trawl through all of this data. So there's a very practical way that you can help. And open source really does help counter those narratives, because it's impossible to argue against a shadow or a satellite image.
Okay, Ivo.
Yeah, to start from what you should not do, or what common people should not do, is that when they find a piece of disinformation, then share it saying, look, piece of disinformation, because they are going to have only distributed in that sense. So stay calm. But Lithuanian elves were already mentioned. The Estonian equivalent for them would be Propastop, and I'm sure if you contact Propastop and speak about your wish to contribute, then some possibility will be found.
Okay, we have to close our discussion here now. I think, first of all, thank you for everybody in the audience. You have been very patient and staying here. And also thank you everybody in the panel for being able to keep this audience. I think it's quite common that people would just walk away and see if there's some coffee or
it was all
another
the animal
discussion.
Chat. All the animal chat. They loved it.
Yeah. We should have, next time it will be animals we discuss. Okay. Well, thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.